Welcome to All Things Game Pass. My name is TurboTony, and today I'll be reviewing Dungeons of NaheulBeuk, the Amulet of Chaos, available for Xbox One, Xbox Series X, and PC. Dungeons of NaheulBeuk is a single-player, top-down, strategy, turn-based tactics RPG with a massive emphasis on humour. This game is what would happen if someone shoved XCOM, Dungeons & Dragons and a fairly decent comedian into a blender. That's probably the best way to describe it. The game follows adventures of a band of heroes that are mostly fully characterised by the actual names, right? So you've got the Ranger, who's a typical bumbling leader of the group, the Dwarf, who's addicted to money, who hates the Elf, who's a bit ditzy and loves nature. And they're actually called by those names. They are the Ranger, the Dwarf, the Elf, etc. And if that sounds one-dimensional, that's because it is, but it's not in a bad way. If there is one selling point to this game, which I'll get to later in the video, is the game's brilliant writing and characters and the way that it uses those one-dimensional personalities to its advantage. So first of all, let's talk combat. Dungeons of NaheulBeuk is an out-and-out tactics game where you will choose where to place your party before every combat encounter. You'll be taking turns deciding when to attack, when to move, when to use items and spells. And yes, just like XCOM, you can also overwatch on your turn with any ranged character to attack anyone who moves into a specific area. And believe me, that's not the only crossover from that game too. However, as the game has a far bigger emphasis on skills and melee combat, creating decent battle lines where your group can't be flanked or can't be backstabbed is absolutely huge and key in this game, because it will punish you if you leave your squishier characters like the Wizardess in the open, where she'll need other party members to either aid or block off routes of attack. And the game's AI is fairly decent at times at getting around your battle lines and attacking your more vulnerable members of your party. And this is where NaheulBeuk does well in making sure all members of your party, including a selected member of which you can choose to join out of a few choices, all have different strengths and weaknesses. After a couple of battles, you'll soon learn which characters are meant for what purpose in combat. And while you can level them up to give them more capabilities, that purpose is mainly the same throughout. And characters like the Thief can stealth themselves to move around and backstab backline opponents, while the Barbarian, for instance, can cleave enemies that bunch up in groups with his sword abilities. This game does have an addition of critical attacks and also critical failures, which have led to certain enemies or party members accidentally killing themselves in the middle of combat. So if that is the sort of thing that annoys you, then I'm afraid to say that NaheulBeuk has that in store. For myself, I have a high threshold for these kinds of things, but I understand that not everyone's like that, and for some people that is a massive turn-off for these strategy games, where you could have a 95% chance of hitting someone, but you just land the one on the die of 20, and you end up hitting yourself and knocking yourself out. That does happen in NaheulBeuk. Over the course of the game, you'll be exploring a huge tower, the aforementioned Dungeon of NaheulBeuk, finding new loot to equip and characters to encounter. And you'll find that NaheulBeuk's combat is a little bit too simple. Then the selling point of the game is undoubtedly its charm and its humour. The entire game is a parody of all the fantasy tropes in the genre, and it has a blast of a time pointing out all the funny inconsistencies in expected characters and lore. It's actually an adaptation of a French comedy radio series that was created, and I'm glad that it's made its way into a video game format, because either it probably would have just passed me entirely, and that would not have sat well with me. It's very funny. The voice acting for all the main party members are fantastic and fit perfectly, and their banter back and forth was genuinely one of the most entertaining things throughout the entire game. So tell me, do you like curse words in your fantasy games? Because if you do, this game has plenty of Fs to give. I'm keeping my language a little bit diplomatic there. The game's narrative here is fairly bland, but the entire game leans on its great character work to pull you through, and there wasn't a single party member that doesn't have like a moment to shine, or any party member that I just outright hated or didn't want to hear from. All of them are really, really good, and they all at least have one moment that made me smile or often made me laugh. And NaheulBeuk is a game that wears its comedy and charm as a badge of honor proudly, as it absolutely should. And as I said before, there is a leveling system, but it does come with a few issues. So first of all, there isn't really that much room to change different characters to suit other roles. I also wasn't a fan of locking off armor pieces behind trait unlocks, or exploration abilities being locked off like this as well. The Ogre is the only character that can break through walls, and thus, for me, lost out on 2 passive upgrades for combat that he would have had if I hadn't chose for him to be able to have that ability. An alternate idea would have been to add a few different characters that have that ability, so you can choose which ones have that ability and therefore lose out on that passive ability, or just come up with a different idea altogether. There was also a few encounters that I was able to begin access to far earlier than my actual level, which gave me a couple of unwinnable combat encounters. So if you're looking to play as I do, where you're investigating every nook and cranny, just be aware that you might stumble across a side mission that you'll have to come back to after a couple of in-game chapters have passed. In terms of explorable passives, I think the game missed out on the opportunity to have more characters that can interact with the world. You have the Thief that can disarm traps, and the Ogre, as I said, that can open up secret doors, but that's it. The rest of your party members, there's no reason to walk around the dungeon as them, bar maybe picking your favourite and having them lead the team. But if you're a fan of tactics-based games and you're looking for an extremely light-hearted adventure, then Dungeons of NaheulBeuk is definitely for you. There aren't too many games like this that are on the Game Pass, and it might scratch that turn-based RPG itch that you might have had for a little while. The game is supported by Xbox achievements, cloud saves, and Xbox Play Anywhere. It's available now on the Xbox Game Pass, has an install size of 7.6 gigabytes, and my review rating for this game is an 8 out of 10. So make sure that you stay tuned to all things Game Pass for news, reviews, and features. And remember, if you did like this, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And thank you for watching.